So I'm here today with Senior Advisor to the Lincoln Project, Ms. Tara Setmayer, my old friend, MeidasTouch Contributor Adam Mockler, and Legal AF host and former Manhattan Chief Assistant DA Karen Friedman Agnifilo. I wonder what that AF means. Anyway, I digress. Thank you. I really appreciate Adam, Karen, and Tara. So there's so much to talk about. Day two, the former president's historic criminal trial here. The jury selection began yesterday. Trial began yesterday. 96 separate potential jurors were screened on that day, yesterday. More than half of them were dismissed. None have yet to be picked, right? I think they kept like, what, 36 or something that yet to be picked. So let's start with you, Tara Setmayer. Jury selection began, and so what do you think of, what are your takeaways for today? Of yesterday, I should say. What are your takeaways of yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a great education in how the jury selection process actually works. I don't know that a lot of Americans are actually familiar with that. So if there's an upside, all of the media circus around this, which it gives me a little bit of agita. I don't like the idea of us following every single aspect of this, of the Trump show. But parts of this are important for the American people to see how the system works.
Why don't you like following this? Because listen, I did something yesterday and everybody, it was like 95% Tara said, cameras in the courtroom. The American people need to know transparency. You don't like following every aspect as if it gives me OJ, it's giving OJ trial.
Yes, that's why we could have a whole conversation, a whole show on the impact the OJ trial coverage had on where we are today. In political media coverage, but I just feel that there needs to be a balance. Like, it's important that we see the institutions working, since there's such an attack on our basic institutions, particularly the justice system from the Trump side of things. So that transparency part of it, I think, is good. Like following him to the courthouse and then, like, you know, every living, breathing moment of what he's doing. I just think there's a certain sensationalism in it that I worry about, because this is actually serious.
Yeah.
This is the first time a president of the United States is on trial in a criminal trial. This is serious, and I worry about the entertainment aspect of this overshadowing the impact of the rule of law. That's my concern.
Am I reading in your face, Adam, that you disagree with that, or you think she's right?
No, I totally agree. Yeah.
You do?
Yeah. Actually, I had similar takeaways, so I think it really helped reinforce my trust in the system and in the process. Not that I ever doubted it, but Donald Trump has spent the months leading up to the trial trying to say he's being unfairly targeted or unjustly persecuted. So seeing that out of the several hundred jurors, we saw 96 go through the process of voir dire, and I believe 50 of them said they could not put their biases aside. So it was nice to see that the system is working exactly how it was intended. And we could talk about this later, but then Judge Merchan also said a lot of this evidence has to be rejected because it's prejudicial, which shows that Judge Merchan isn't some wicked Democrat who is out to get Donald Trump. No, he's doing his best, and he is impartial.
Okay. Karen, you want to weigh in on that? You're being awfully stoic there and patient, patiently waiting.
You know, it's interesting. I'm a lawyer. I'm not an expert in media by any means, but it's interesting to me. I always feel like Donald Trump, like we're all golden retrievers, and you know, and Donald Trump throws us a ball and we go and chase it, no matter what it is that he says, how absurd it is, or, you know, it doesn't matter. And yet that's what we do. And so what I'm trying to do on the MeidasTouch and with Legal AF is to not follow that ball that he throws, and instead focus on the message that needs to get out and the truth, because there's a lot of false information that he says. You know, I have no problem with people disagreeing on issues, you know, liberal, conservative, whatever. But what I don't like is when there's lies being told. And so, you know, and what's interesting to me is when you watch these press conferences that he comes out and he'll say, you know, the judge says that I can't go to Barron Trump's graduation. This is so important, Barron Trump's graduation. And then I go back and I read the transcript and I see that's actually not what the judge said. But you wouldn't know that from what Donald Trump said. What the judge said was, we'll talk about that later, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to talk about it now.
And Karen, we're going to talk about that later. So hold that thought then. And I appreciate, I respect that you said you're a legal mind, you're not like a media commentator. So thank you. So then let's talk about the law here, because they better move it along, because they didn't pick a single juror yesterday. I wonder if it should go faster now that they've gotten this so-called Sandoval hearing. out of the way, which we're learning about, the judicial system. What exactly is a Sandoval hearing, and was that the reason for the delay that it took so long to get the jurors into the courtroom?
So there was no delay. But the interesting thing is, and I've tried, I came up in the Manhattan DA's office. I spent my entire legal career there, and I've tried many cases there, including I've appeared before this judge, Judge Juan Merchan, many times. And the thing that's fascinating and amazing about our criminal justice system is it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how rich you are, how powerful you are. At the end of the day, if you are accused of a crime and you're charged, you're going to go to the same dingy, dirty courthouse, use the same disgusting bathrooms, and deal with the same issues that every single person deals with. And I've yet to ever do a trial where when I show up on day one, there isn't housekeeping and ministerial matters that take a whole morning, just like it did with Donald Trump. So it was funny that many people have the perspective that there was a delay, but it was normal pretrial motions that happened as you are about to start a case. So one of them is a Sandoval motion, and that's when it happens. In every case, it happens at that moment, right before the jury comes in, and you talk about.
So what is that exactly, where you get certain things off the table?
Yeah, so the Sandoval is to basically ask to inform the judge and the defendant, these are the prior bad acts that I want to talk about if he testifies. I want to cross-examine him if he testifies, and I want to use these prior bad acts. Sometimes they're convictions or arrests, sometimes it's prior accusations like this, or it's talking about things like the other assaults against him, et cetera, or that he committed those accusations. And so that's called a Sandoval hearing, and where the judge legally will weigh. Obviously, it's probative, right? But you weigh the probative value with the prejudicial value. And if the prejudicial value, if it's too prejudicial, then he does not allow it in. And that's the same balancing test he does for what's called a Molyneux hearing, which also took place yesterday.
Oh my gosh.
I know it's French, Molineux, Molyneux, and it's based. Sandoval and Molyneux are based after a case name, and that's about prior bad acts that the people want to address, that they want to put in their case in chief. So that's where they talked about the Access Hollywood tape and that stuff.
Okay,
and Karen McDougal too, right? Wasn't
exactly.
Does that come in? Do we know, Tara or Karen, do any of those come in, the Access Hollywood tape? I'm not sure E. Jean Carroll is even relevant to this, but do you know what they decided?
Yeah, so Karen McDougal is going to testify. He decided that she's going to testify because that goes to his motive and intent about wanting to suppress negative information for the election, because that's what his motive was, and that's a required element that bumps this up to a felony from the misdemeanor falsifying business records, right? He's charged with falsifying business records, and the difference between the felony and the misdemeanor is you did it in order to either cover up a crime or commit a crime. And the crime that they're talking about that he was trying to conceal was election law violations. And so in order to prove that, they are allowing certain evidence. And now with the Access Hollywood tape, the judge actually compromised there. He said the tape itself is too prejudicial, where you've got the president bragging, the former president bragging about sexual assault, because that's what it is. But so I'm not going to let you show the tape, but I'm going to instead allow you to read the transcript.
Refer to the tape, right? You can refer to the transcript, but you can't play the tape. I mean, Tara, how many times did we listen to that tape? And I think you were with me the night when the tape came out, and we were. Yes. It was way past. Wasn't it like almost 3 a.m. or whenever he came out?
No, we were on pretty late. Wasn't quite that late, but we were on late for your show, and that was the day it came out. And I remember it's one of those things where a lot of people remember exactly where they were when that came out. I was in the ShopRite parking lot near my house getting ready to buy dinner for the weekend, and I turned right around and said, holy shit, this is going to be huge. I thought for sure that would have knocked Trump out of the campaign at the time. I mean, in any other campaign, that would have been the end of it. But we saw what happened. And I actually, blame Kellyanne Conway for him escaping that whole controversy, because as the first woman campaign manager to lead a successful campaign, depending on how you define successful. But she was in a position to say, no, I can no longer serve. This is something that I'm uncomfortable with as a woman, as a mother, and as someone who believes in morals and principles, allegedly. If she had come out and said that she was walking away from Trump, I think the rest of the Republican Party would have had the courage, particularly the men, to say enough is enough. Because some did come out right away and say, how do I look my kids in the face?
Yeah, but they went
then
back.
we saw how fast they turned
They went
around
right
and
back.
went right back. So
Yeah.
anyway, that moment in time was one, I think, that a lot of people was an inflection point of the the slippery slope into the lack of character and morality and hypocrisy that we see today coming from Republicans. So yeah, the Access Hollywood tape being able, at least in some form, to be introduced to this, I think is critically important. Again, back to what Karen said, because it establishes motive. Timing of that, it was early October. Talk about October surprise. There were multiple. That was the first and not the last on both sides. And it shows motive, that he was like, holy cow, that we've got it. We can't have this. And then Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels all coming out at the same time.
Well, Stormy Daniels is the centerpiece of this whole
Right.
thing. But I mean, listen, wow, and he still won. That's the thing. You were talking about Kellyanne Conway, and he still won. I've got to ask you, because Luke, he uses everything, Adam, he uses everything to his advantage. After the court adjourned yesterday, Trump spoke briefly to the cameras outside the courthouse, repeating that the trial is, and I quote here, he says, it is a political witch hunt. He referred to the trial as a scam. He mentioned several times missing his son's graduation, which Karen talked about just a while ago, which he's been eagerly anticipating. He blames the corruption of the Manhattan DA's office and the SCOTUS on the radical left Democrats, I don't know how he gets that, as an act of what he called election interference. He just cannot control himself, right?
Yeah, he can't. He likes to spin everything. And there's this weird theory that the Trump campaign hasn't really bought that much ad time or ad space in the past few months or the months coming up. So people think he's betting on this wall-to-wall coverage sort of being a part of his campaign, but I don't think it's going how he planned. I mean, Sleepy Don was trending on Twitter yesterday. We saw all of these pieces where he essentially was not performing how he was supposed to, and I think that is going to undermine a lot of this campaigning that he thought he would be doing in court.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Why not?
I'm not sure I agree with that, Adam, because this is the most number of cameras. His biggest audience will be this trial and others. Every time there's a break, every time it adjourns, he gets in front of those cameras and he says exactly what he wants to say. It is, what is it, earned media?
Yes, earned media.
It's earned
that he got
media
billions
that
of before in 2016.
he could not pay for this kind of coverage.
But
Tara?
That's why I said I'm concerned about the way
Adam,
this is being
let Adam
covered.
finish your
But
thought.
go
I'm
ahead,
sorry,
yeah.
I cut you off.
I
No,
think he
just
comes
go ahead.
off as so unhinged in some of these appearances on camera, and I think like the Sleepy Don thing, which undermines the months of Sleepy Joe, the years of Sleepy Joe propaganda that he tried to spread. So this idea, I mean, I remember his campaign director yesterday sent a tweet showing it, he said wall-to-wall coverage, which kind of seems like that's what they were planning on. They were planning on this wall-to-wall coverage helping out his campaign. And again, back to my point, I'm not sure it's working out how he wanted to. I mean, of course, it'll play to his core fans who eat up everything he says. I mean, I talk to these people on the field a lot, but I mean, to like independents or to the broader population, I'm not sure this case looks as good as he wants it to look. But I see where you're coming from, Don.
Go ahead,
Adam,
Karen.
you're right, but he's right about that part, because obviously the independents and moderates are they're going to swing the election. The base, the MAGAs, it doesn't matter. They've said it. I'm sure Adam has covered this, and Meidas has. They have people out here saying he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue. They wouldn't care. They're still with him. So there are those people. But how does this play to the general public, the people who are casually watching this? I think you're right that some of those images of him being more unhinged than usual, like at his rallies, does not help that. But then you also run into the fatigue of it. People just get tired of it, and it's almost baked in at this point, which concerns me because his erratic behavior has been normalized in a lot of ways. And that's where we get into how does the media cover this? I hope they cover it properly in context.
I was wondering, you know, if we're speaking of cameras in the courtroom, and it is my legal eagles who were on yesterday, both happen to have a connection, well, at least we know Jeffrey Toobin does, to the O.J. Simpson trial, cameras in the courtroom. and how O.J. Simpson was sort of peacocking and preening for the cameras. Donald Trump would do the same thing, I would imagine, if there were cameras in the courtroom. So I'm not sure. I would love the transparency, but he would play to those cameras. I'm wondering about the sleeping, if that was a strategy, okay, to show his supporters that I'm so uninterested in this, I'm so beyond this, that I'm not even paying attention, I'm going to fall asleep. This is boring me. Adam?
I think when you stay up all night sending Truth Social posts about Michael Cohen or about FISA warrants, then yeah, you're going to fall asleep in court. And if I'm going to be as charitable as possible, I mean, he is an old dude. The process is probably pretty boring. I mean, it's probably not that unusual for someone to fall asleep, but it really reminds me of when I was in high school a few years ago and I had a detention for being tardy or whatever.
Oh my
And
God.
when you're in those
Poor baby.
detentions, you get the urge to be more of a nuisance, essentially, right? And I think Donald Trump has that same juvenile urge to be a nuisance and to rebel against authority. And I think we're going to see him become increasingly unhinged on Truth Social as this trial goes on.
Yeah, well, that
He's a
brings us
nuisance,
to
all right.
that brings us to this, because Karen, Judge Merchan imposed a number of gag orders on Trump because it was in response to attacks against witnesses, even Judge Merchan and his own daughter. I mean, Trump has continued to test those gag orders. He continues to post about the trial on Truth Social. What do you expect happens if these attacks continue?
So I think, look, let's just be real. One thing I do agree with Donald Trump on is that he's being treated differently than everybody else and every other defendant, because any other defendant who violated the gag order as blatantly and flagrantly as Donald Trump has and does the very day that the judge expands the gag order, clarifies it, et cetera, would have been put in a long time ago, right? And when I say put in, I mean incarcerated for the duration of the case, because he does not listen. So, and that, I've seen that happen a million times. That's what happens. That's what's done. Look at Sam Bankman-Fried in the FTX case. Much smaller transgression, much less in the face of the judge. He reached out. He was going to release a letter of one of the witnesses, and the judge put him right in. He was in for the rest of the, because don't forget, every person who's charged with a crime is released on conditions.
Right.
And so Donald Trump was arrested, and the judge agreed to release him with certain conditions. And then, and at the time that he released him with those conditions, he basically said, watch it. He gave him an oral warning. When that wasn't enough, he imposed a gag order. When that wasn't enough, and he had to clarify it because he started attacking the judge's daughter, he then expands it and says, okay, I'm expanding it to family members. You can still attack me. You can still attack Alvin Bragg, the DA, but leave everybody else alone, and the witnesses in particular. What does he do that very day? Within hours, he starts reposting. It's like a child, right? It's like it's like a child who you say, do not walk out of your room, and then they walk up to the door and they put their foot right there and they look at you. Like
he starts reposting other people's things, so he says, "I'm not saying it."
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's
But
secondhand.
then,
So what happens? Or what response would there be from Judge Merchan if he can't control himself, if he continues to do that, even reposts, etc.?
Yeah, so he actually didn't repost the most recently 3 times he went and attacked witnesses. He attacked Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels. And so what happened was the DA's office yesterday, one of the things that happened that was causing the wait for the jury was they moved for an order to show cause. And it's an order to show cause about why Donald Trump should be held in contempt. And so the judge says, okay, well, I'm going to give Trump's lawyers until Friday to respond. And then next Tuesday, we're going to have a hearing at 9:30 on the order to show cause. And the reason the judge is giving him a little bit of a runway, I believe, and of course this is just me interpreting tea leaves, but what I believe is he's basically, that's almost like another warning. It's like, control your client, like see what he does this week, because because he'll want to do graduated sanctions. He's not going to put him in right away. So he's going to this week say, watch it. Next week, hold a hearing. He might fine him the $1,000 per tweet, which is what was asked for. And then you'll see him escalate the judge in terms of what he does next. The ultimate nuclear option that the judge will have to do if Donald Trump refuses to stop is he'll have to put him in. But the way he'll do it, I think, he won't send him to Rikers Island. What he'll do is there's a jail cell in the back of the courtroom. He'll put him in, to that little jail cell with a Secret Service agent, and make the lawyer go in there and promise that he'll never do it again, and then he'll finally stop.
Like putting him in legal timeout, like the
Can you
petulant child that he
imagine,
is.
Yes, that's the most. That's the most that the judge would do.
Behind bars, because so the judge then only has a few options. The option would be to send him to Rikers or whatever, but they would never. I don't think he's actually going to serve time as a former president. I think he's too compromised. But look, I'm not an attorney. I don't know here. But let's talk about his legal team is requesting that the former president be given a recess. This was on April 25th to attend a SCOTUS hearing of his presidential immunity case. The judge denied that. He's going to be stuck in court for some time. You mentioned, Karen, you talked about this, wanting to attend Barron's graduation, but the judge, look, his case is going to the Supreme Court, right? This immunity case. He has cases in other jurisdictions. He's not going to be able to be on the campaign trail for that, but as we said, he's going to use this earned media. You said he lied about Barron, and you're concerned about the lies. Why do you say that? Explain.
Well, okay, so he lied because he's saying that the judge will not let him go. What actually happened is the judge has not yet ruled. He says, I'm not going to rule right now. We'll see when we get there. But you would think that based on what Donald Trump, the former president, prior to him, when a president or a former president says something, at least people like me believed him, right? And I felt the same way when I learned that Bill Clinton had lied to my face, right? I was absolutely crestfallen by it, because it means something when a president or a former president says something. And
not anymore.
Not anymore. and so he lies about that, and it concerns me. And that's like I said, that's why, even though I practice law full time, I spend a lot of time studying every single court filing, every transcript, everything I can get my hands on, and try to report on the MeidasTouch network on our show Legal AF, in order to get the truth out there. And of course, sometimes I give my opinions too, but then I say it's my opinion. But we got to get the information out. We got to get the truth out.
Well, Adam,
but
I had to.
I was going to say, that's why he does
Tara.
that, Don. He does that because he knows that most Americans are intellectually lazy. They're not going to take the multiple steps that Karen or Adam or you or me or those of us who live and breathe this every day, they're not going to take 3 steps to read transcripts and see what was the difference. Did he actually say this or not? So this is where the argument for cameras in the courtroom for these proceedings is actually a good thing. I
agree.
Because then it's because the American people respond to very short, quick things. So if you can show the clip on the nightly news where Donald Trump said this, but this is actually what the judge said, then the people, reasonable people, not the MAGAs, they'll go, oh, okay, about that. He's misrepresenting it. But if you have to go through transcripts, you actually have to read 5 paragraphs down in the story. Unless you put it in the headline and say Donald Trump lied about what the judge said, people aren't going to pay attention to that. And Trump and his campaign knows this, so he says whatever and asks for forgiveness later, because by the time you see the correction, no one knows the difference.
You don't think that can be counteracted with transparency, having cameras in the courtroom, and then people can see what he actually says instead of through the lens of a.
I do.
That's what I'm saying. I thought you said no cameras in the courtroom. I thought you were against cameras.
No, that's where the argument is for
it.
That's where you can make the argument for it. There's the pros and cons. That's the pro right there, where you can see the transparency.
They have cameras down in Georgia, in Fulton County, Georgia. There's every single thing that happens there is televised live. And, at first I was like, oh, you can't have cameras in the courtroom. I used to think that way, but we live in a different world now, a completely different world. There's, it's not like when there was 3 channels and that, poor Adam doesn't know what we're talking about, when you had to get up and change the channel, and it was like, there were 3 networks and that was it. And that's
that went off at midnight and you do the national anthem and then it would be hashed.
It's true. But, it really what it is now everywhere you look, every single person, including Adam, who graduated high school, 10 months ago, and me, who's, who am I, and are sitting here and we're giving information that's reaching millions of people. And so it's just the amount of information that's out there from just anybody and everybody is staggering. And so if we had cameras out in the courtroom, like they're broadcasting the Supreme Court argument, it's oral, but they're broadcasting it. They're broadcasting the appellate arguments. Like we need to get up with the times, in my opinion. again, and it's time to be transparent and get actual information out there.
Yeah.
Adam, so
Even
listen,
audio.
we're even if it's just audio, but listen, I think it should be the whole shebang, right? We're there. I agree with you, Karen. But Adam, listen, how are younger people paying attention to this? Because I know that they are watching streaming, they're watching podcasts, they're watching streaming shows, and they're on social media. They're not necessarily watching the networks. We know that they're not necessarily watching cable. So how are they watching this, and what do they think about these shenanigans? Because for some people who are able to vote, Donald Trump has been in their lives as a presidential candidate or the president for half of their lives, for about 10 years, right? So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we watched Donald Trump do a lot of this crazy stuff during our most formative years while we were in high school or while we were in college. And I think a lot of times nowadays, people will just watch their favorite TikTok or Instagram creators sort of synthesize what's going on into a 60-second clip. And I think that's kind of unfortunate because a 60-second clip kind of allows you to skirt around a lot of the real facts. But most people in my generation, despite what a lot of the polls say, don't like Donald Trump. Actually, there's a huge anti-establishment part of my generation that don't like either candidate. That's something I've been trying to combat. Like Donald and Trump are.
But isn't he sort of the anti-establishment candidate, or at least he was? Maybe he's establishment now. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, yeah, no, Donald Trump is the anti-establishment, or he tries to be, even though he's a billionaire who flies around on private jets and thinks he should be above the law, but he tries to paint himself as this anti-establishment figure. But people in my generation that are anti-establishment, they say Biden and Trump are effectively the same. They think that one issue should supersede all of these other issues, and it's unfortunate that people have. I mean, I think it's natural for every generation to have a little bit of an anti-establishment wing. I mean, we can go back to the 60s or the 70s, but now that is being amplified by things like TikTok, things like Instagram. And I don't want to go too far off track, but we have companies trying to amplify this idea. We have ByteDance trying to place their thumb on the scale of this election, trying to spread this idea that Trump and Biden are effectively the same. You might as well not vote at all. When that couldn't be farther from the truth, right?
Interesting.
Parent
Okay.
company of TikTok, for those who don't know what ByteDance is.
Yeah, ByteDance is the owner of TikTok,
Yeah.
the Chinese owner, right?
Correct.
Of TikTok.
And Xi Jinping would love to have influence over one
Yep.
of the most important elections in American history, right?
Okay, so let's talk about then. This is really important because we talked a bit about the SCOTUS. We just just sort of scratched the surface here. But Karen, he's got this immunity thing going in front of the Supreme Court. Do you expect the immunity ruling that it can affect this trial or other trials at all? What if they say, yeah, the president is immune? What happens?
God help us.
Well, I don't think they're going to rule. I don't think anybody thinks they're going to say that the president can literally do anything and never be held accountable. That's just not possible. That there's
Karen, we didn't think a lot of things, and then Donald Trump became president. He pushed and went up against institutions and pushed the limits, and some of the limits failed.
I think they're going to account for the fact that somebody might be president one day that's not Donald Trump, and let's say they were to do something that even they thought was wrong. I think they will find some carve out that they're going to say that the president is not immune for certain things, and potentially, I don't think they're going to find that there's criminal immunity for the president, because the whole point of our Constitution and the separation of powers was to reject this idea of a sovereign and a king and one person who's more powerful than everybody else. And that's why there are three branches of government. They're separate but equal. They all have equal power. That's why there's checks and balances. I mean, and so I think they're going to find that okay, there are parameters with civil immunity that is already established in the law, that it's that essentially if you're doing your job civilly, right, you can't get sued. But if you're acting outside your job, again, like Bill Clinton, who was able to be sued by Paula Jones because that wasn't within his job description, that was entirely personal, that they said, okay, you can civilly sue them for something that's outside your job description. So I think at a minimum, they would find that a president can't be criminally prosecuted for something that's in his job description.
All right, Karen.
But I still think that they're not going to find that.
You are the legal expert. You're the legal eagle here. But I think what you're not taking into account, and I think that Tara is going to agree with me, And Adam, I'll see what Adam has to say as well. Here's what I think. No one is thinking, no, you guys aren't taking into account Project 2025. Because if he does become president again, he wants to get rid of institutions. He wants to get rid of the Department of Justice. He wants to be able to, to enact the Insurrection Act. So while we may have those parameters and limits in place now, Tara, if he becomes president again, he's going to get rid of them. They may not be there.
But you want to know what's brilliant though? And this is why Alvin Bragg and my old office, the Manhattan DA's office, I couldn't be more proud of them bringing this case. That can't be touched by any of this.
Right, because it's state, not federal.
Exactly.
True, but this is the thing, though. I mean, you're right, Don, and I'm glad you brought up Project 2025. Most Americans do not know what this is, and it's a almost 1,000-page behemoth manifesto of the fascist wet dreams of Donald Trump and MAGA world, and all of those people who he's surrounding himself with that have been in the fringe corners of conservative right-wing think tanks and these fringe organizations that were never given mainstream consideration in the Republican Party are now front and center. Over 100 groups contributed to this thing, and it goes through basically dismantling the entire federal government as we know it, and in implementing these really concerning extremist right-wing, I would say fascist, and I don't use that in lightly. I'm not being hyperbolic here. Ideology in governing. It's not really governing, it's ruling over people, whether it's controlling women's health choices and doing and codifying those things through federal regulation and edict, to, like you said, dismantling institutions from the Justice Department and how those things work. Donald Trump if he were to win again, and I don't know that enough people fully get this, which is why we're doing what we're doing, and it's such a responsibility that as people that have platforms, we inform people about what the facts are. You don't have to believe us. They're telling us what they want to do. They have laid it out in Project 2025. So yes, even though the Supreme Court may come up with a limited immunity ruling on this, which Karen's probably right, there are certain parts of, even if he were to get elected again, that he would have control over, and who's going to stop him? That's the problem.
Right, who's going to stop him, because the Republican Party hasn't stopped him, and he and his administration will be smarter this time. Last time was a test. This time
John Bolton tried to say the other day that, Trump's not an existential threat. He's not smart enough to implement all of this. No, he shouldn't be president, but Biden's bad too. Trump's not an existential threat. Really? Is he that naive? He is surrounding himself with people who have been studying this kind of stuff since they were 5 years old because they're fascinated by it, and now they get a chance to implement it. So is he smart enough to do it? No, but he knows who to surround himself who will. You want Stephen Miller as the Attorney General?
Oh, goodness.
Or as the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, right?
Wow. Yeah.
That's why we have to stop him now before he gets into office, because then it's too late.
Adam, as this stretches on, I want to know what you're looking at, and I wonder, if you can give us some insight of what you think the Biden administration is doing, how they're looking at this, because they must be sitting back going, well, our work is, pretty much done here. They're helping us. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, to touch back on the absolute immunity piece for a second, I'm glad we have a legal mind like Karen, because she knows all these niche French terms and can break down all these arguments way better than I can. But I mean, Jack Smith makes this great point where he cites President Ford pardoning President Nixon, and he says that Nixon accepting this pardon implies that both he and Ford knew that presidents are not immune to anything. And what you asked me is about President Biden. I think that they love this. I think it's coming at a critical time. I mean, ever since Biden's State of the Union, we've seen him.
Certainly took the Sleepy Joe away.
Oh yeah, and now it's Sleepy Don or Don Snorleone or whatever you want to call him. But now we see President Biden rising in the polls. He's edging out Trump in the polls. We see him raising historic amounts of money. We see him giving these speeches, and I think if you put them side by side, that's all you need to do. One of them is obviously a lot more unhinged, and one of them is maybe talks a little bit slower, but like everything he says is absolutely perfect in my opinion. And one more thing, when I'm out on the field talking to people about this absolute immunity case, I always ask them, like, do you think a president like Trump should have absolute immunity? And they always say, oh yeah, of course. Then I ask the most obvious follow-up in the world, which is, well, should Biden have absolute immunity?
No
And you
way.
see them physically recoil like, oh no, not at all. So, I mean, of course, these people don't have a coherent worldview, but you'd expect a little better from Trump's lawyers. What do
It's
you-
a cult.
My
That's
favorite
why.
thing is when they ask the questions, about Joe Biden, but it's really questions about Donald Trump. And they say Joe Biden, paid off an adult film star while his wife had just had a baby and whatever. And they go, that is awful. And they say, oh, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. I meant Donald Trump. And then in this, the next breath, they make an excuse for him.
Because it's a cult. It's not rational. These
Thank
people are
you.
indoctrinated.
We
And
will
while
be-
here's the imagery, here's the contrast. While President Biden is presidenting, Donald Trump is criming.
Yeah.
That's the contrast.
But we do know, it's early. It's just April. There's a long time to go until the election, so there'll be many more twists and turns, especially with all these court cases on top of it. I really appreciate all of you joining us. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Karen. We'll be watching. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Don.